How do you get a year's MOT on a truck with all these failures? You sold me a dodgy truck, mate. There's £1,500 worth of work there. If you never came to get this, I was going to the police. There's no way that should have had They're not interested in the fact that you sold a vehicle that shouldn't have been on the road. Listen, mate, I don't want to argue with you. I just want my money back and I want you to take it away. It's not safe. It's not safe, mate. So what you just heard there was the exchange between myself and a marketplace seller. And this was me handing back a vehicle that I bought from him in good faith on marketplace. And it started off as any other kind of purchase in marketplace starts off. Me scrolling, me looking, me finding it, and me messaging the guy. So if you've been following the channel, you'll know that I love to buy used vehicles on marketplace. And I did have a bit of disaster with a previous vehicle, so I thought I'd try again. And what I found was a Ford Ranger. Now, don't get me wrong, it was 20 years old. So if you're buying something that old, you know, you've got to understand that it's going to have its problems, isn't it? And that's fine, I expect that. But what I don't expect is I don't expect people to be deceiving and dishonest in the way that this chap was. And just disclaimer, this video is not about slagging off this chap from Facebook. It is what it is. I'm not here to slate him or expose him or any of those things, so that's not what the video's about. The video's about just helping people be really vigilant on marketplace, because it is full of, it's not full, it's not fair to say that, but it's definitely got a share of idiots, scammers, and people just looking to fleece you. And if you're not vigilant, no, you could end up in the same situation. But this vehicle was listed for £2,700. It was a good hour and a bit away from me, but I really needed a vehicle that was capable of towing and had all the utility features that this Ranger has. So anyway, contacted the guy. After a bit of back and forth, I gave him a deposit because I couldn't pick it up for about a week. The deposit was handed over and that was it. Now when I turned up to pick up this Ranger, what I found quite weird was the address that the guy gave me was for outside a supermarket or at a supermarket. So he obviously lived nearby because there was houses, but he didn't give me the address for his house. And then I couldn't get in touch with him, so we'd driven all this way. And I'm sitting outside Sainsbury's looking at houses, and I couldn't figure out where his house would be because I was looking at the photos of where the Ranger was parked versus what was around. Couldn't see him. Anyway, he eventually answers the phone and tells me, oh yeah, I'm just getting some diesel, I'll just come round the corner. So he wasn't getting diesel at all because he didn't come out of the fuel station. He drove from where the houses were. So he obviously didn't want me knowing where he was staying. He brought the car into the car park, I looked it over. Now let's be honest, when you do these car park exchanges, you're not really in a position to do rigorous and vigorous checks. Some may argue that you are, but I did the basic checks that people would do. I didn't delve into, getting right under the bonnet or right under underneath the car. I did have a quick look at underneath to make sure there was no obvious rock. Had a look under the bonnet, but I mean, it looked fine. Do you know what I mean? So anyway, bit back and forth, gave the guys money, and away we went. Now, it was a good hour and a half drive to get home. Started this thing up and away I went, but as we drove through the town that I bought it from, everything seemed okay. I hit the motorway, and that's when all the problems started. So the first thing it did was go into limp mode, because obviously I've put it under load. So I didn't like that, straight into limp mode, so I couldn't get it above 2,200 revs, which was an absolute nightmare. What made it even worse was, because I was driving all this way to pick this vehicle up, I wanted to make it worthwhile. So we managed to find a caravan salvage, or a salvage caravan for sale that was kind of on the way home. That was perfect for me to pick up and obviously put into the yard to farm for parts. So I thought, let's get that. and let's tow that up the road as well. So at least then this journey is kind of paid for, and by the time more than paid for by the time I strip this caravan and sell all the parts. So what made it worse was I was towing a caravan up the road with this Ranger that decided to go into limp mode. So that wasn't fun at all. Wouldn't go above 2,200 revs. The minute you hit a hill, forget it. And the irony was, you're driving one of these big trucks that's capable of pulling anything. And this thing, couldn't pull the skin off a rice pudding going up this hill. So the journey home, to say the least, was very interesting. And that wasn't the only thing that happened. The other thing that happened was a massive brake failure at 70 miles an hour. And I had no idea what it was. But again, towing this caravan, managed to get the truck up to 70 miles an hour on the flat. And then all of a sudden we get masses of noise and juddering from the back left-hand corner. I mean, I thought the differential had locked, or I had no idea what happened. I thought it was something to do with the caravan. Manages to pull over, checks the caravan, nothing wrong, looks underneath, nothing obvious. But a bit of smoke coming from the rear wheel. As it turns out, for whatever reason, the back shoes had locked onto the back drum. It's 70 miles an hour. Now what that had done was completely and utterly wrecked the whole braking system. So there was a slave cylinder that had failed, and it wrecked the whole system. Unbeknown to me, by the way, because I'm outside trying to figure out what this is, and then when I did figure it out, I was hitting it with a hammer to try and release the drum, which I think worked. Then I get inside, and then we've got a brake warning light. But it's the wee brake warning light that comes on when you've left the handbrake on, so I'm checking the handbrake. Anyway, what I did notice was when I pulled away, my foot was going to the floor with the brakes. So there was no pressure. So the brakes did work eventually, but not to the rate they should have. So we're in limp mode. We've basically locked the back brakes, and now we don't have any brakes at all through the whole system. What I did notice when I was round the back checking as to what had happened was a massive oil leak as well that was coming from the differential. So this list was just getting bigger and bigger, and I'd only owned this truck half an hour maybe. So already my heart started to sink, thinking, Jesus, what's going on here? Now, the point of this story is what was really puzzling me about this truck was all these things that were wrong. The other thing I noticed, was I felt like I was in a 1950s movie. I was driving like this. You were turning the wheel left and right, and there was nothing. So it turns out all the track rod end bushes were all failed, perished and rotten as well. So how did this truck get a year's MOT on it? How do you get a year's MOT on a truck with all these failures? Well, when I got it home, I called my local garage, explained to them that I'd bought a second-hand, but a used vehicle from Marketplace. Doesn't feel right, but it does have a year's MOT, so I'd love you to check it over, please. So it was booked in, and that was that. I forgot all about it for a couple of days. So the garage phones me back, and they've got all the context of what's happened, so they understand that I bought it from Marketplace. They understand that these things have went wrong when I've been driving it home. So I get a list over the phone. So the first thing that's wrong with it, going into limp mode, is the EGR valve. So the EGR valve has failed. Now, if it had been a MAF sensor, it would have been a different story. A MAF sensor, you can pick them up for like 20 quid. I could have fitted that myself quite easily. An EGR valve is a different kettle of fish. Now, for the Ford Ranger, apparently it's quite common for these things to fail. There isn't really a used market for them. So 500 quid. 500 quid to replace an EGR valve. Okay, that was the first thing on the list. The guy then confirmed what I had believed, which was there had been some kind of brake component failure in the rear, which in turn had carried itself through to the rest of the braking system. So we were losing fluid, there was air in the system. So that rear slave cylinder was going to have to be fixed. Probably going to need a new rotor. And he said because of that, we'll probably need to look at your pads and stuff like that as well. Fair enough. Okay, what else? He said, your vehicle's been heavily undersealed. I was like, yeah, no, the guy told me that he had it professionally undersealed. Well, it's not been professionally undersealed. Basically, what had happened was it was put on a ramp, lifted, and some guy just attacked it with black spray. So what that was covering up was weak points, rust points. They've obviously done their MOT checks, and you know, a screwdriver starting to find its way through certain parts of the body, and it covered up some really kind of badly corroded areas underneath the truck. Excellent. So he did say it was going to need some welding as well. So, and a few other niggles, and the tyres weren't great either. But I mean, look, I knew that when I picked it up. So I mean, I was prepared to replace the tyres. I think that's fair enough, right? Anyway, so I asked the guy, hit me, how much is this going to cost me? 1,500 quid. £1,500 to put this right. Now I asked him, I was like, now listen, I've used this garage, they're reputable, use them a lot, family uses them, and they're one of the kind of local garages in a very small area that we live in. So there was no issue there. I know what he was doing was legit, and he was, you know, quoting me accordingly. So there's no concerns about that. And I know a wee bit about cars, so I kind of suspected some of the stuff that he was saying anyway. But my question to him was, how on earth? How did this thing pass an MOT? How can a car pass an MOT with, oh, I forgot to mention obviously the track rod ends and stuff, so all those were perished. So how can a truck or a car pass its MOT when the track rod ends have failed? An EGR valve isn't an MOT failure, but it massively affects the performance. You know, a compromised brake system, rust, you know, how is this possible? Now this guy's a professional and obviously he doesn't want to talk ill about other garages, but he couldn't really tell me, but I could tell, well, he said it in not so many words, but his belief was that the MOT wasn't legit. Now I was starting to believe that anyway. The more and more I started to find on this truck, the more and more I was starting to believe that I don't think this MOT was legit. So, and one of the things that kind of raised awareness for me on this truck not being legit, or the MOT not being legit on this truck, was when you checked the MOT history on VOSA website or the government website, the last MOT it sailed through it with no advisories. So if it's passed its MOT with no advisories, Stevie Wonder's done this MOT on this truck, because he's missed everything and all these things should have been fixed. So the guy said to me at the garage, he's like, so listen, I'll leave it with you, it's £1,500. If you want to do it, then obviously we'll leave it with us, we'll get it fixed and you'll get it back and it'll be roadworthy and, you know, it'll be on the road for a year at least. Alright, so I left it, I had a wee think about it, and then I thought, no, absolutely not. So I got in touch with the guy that I bought it from, and of course he ignored my messages and continued to ignore them until I changed my tactic. And then I sent him another message basically saying, look, I know you've put an illegal MOT on this, get back in touch with me before I contact VOSA and the police, and then we return this truck to you in the back of a recovery truck. Then I got an answer. So instantly I get an answer. Bring it back to me and I'll repair it. Are you having a laugh? You're going to repair it. You're the one that got an MOT on it and nothing got fixed on it. You sent it to Stevie Wonder's garage. So no, you're fine. I don't want you to fix it. So then I gave him another option, which was, look, I appreciate I bought an old truck. However, there's a lot wrong with this that's going to cost 1,500 quid. At least send me back half of that from the money that I paid you for the truck. And I'm prepared to pay the rest. Because to be fair, I did really want this truck. Because it is ideal for the business that I am operating. Nah, didn't want to do that either. So he didn't want to do that either. The next thing he said to me was, after some, messages back and forth, he said, just bring it back. All right. I said, well, I'm not bringing it back. Why not? There is no way I'm putting this thing on the road. I ain't driving this thing. It's down at the garage. There is no way that I am putting myself at risk driving this truck that's got illegal particulars on it. Said, you'll need to come and get it, and I'll need to be put in a trailer, because nobody should be driving this thing until it gets fixed. So that was arranged, and I arranged to meet him one evening. That was a Saturday evening, and I arrived. At the time I said I would arrive, and there he was, with a newer Ford Ranger and a big trailer transporter. And the footage that I captured obviously gives you a lot of context as to his beliefs and mine. So let's have a wee look at that. Now, what really got me about this guy was he knew fine well that, you know, this vehicle wasn't right. And I'm not an idiot. I know that it goes on. You know, there's probably illegal MOTs getting done all the time. There'll be loads, hundreds, thousands of vehicles on the road with MOTs, right? It's a difficult thing to police. But me, for my safety and my morals, that's just not me. I'm not going to be doing something like that. But this guy obviously did. And he sold it. And that's what I think is, the worst thing about it is to go ahead and get a vehicle like this and sell it. Sell it when you know that it isn't right, that it's had an illegal MOT on it. And you go ahead and sell it to a member of the public. Now, what's worse is when I pulled up, the missus came with me and we brought one of the kids. So he knew that I had kids and he knew that I was going to put them in it. And I did put them in it when I got it back, only because they were excited to see it. So I didn't go anywhere. But the fact remains is, he knew I had kids, he knew I was going to put them in it at some point. He knew I was operating a business that required a workhorse to be safe. And he sold it anyway. And when I challenged him on it, you can hear on the video that, oh no, nothing wrong with it. His mechanic's a good mechanic. Well, he's obviously not, because he's missed some very, very key details that should have been picked up on this truck. He took this truck away and I got the refund, right? Now, it was £2,700. Had I decided to go ahead with, the repairs, that would have been another £1,500 on top of it. And you could argue, 2,700 plus 1,500, is that a decent price for a workhorse like a Ford Ranger, albeit 20 years old, which didn't look 20 years old, by the way. It actually looked really good on the outside, and inside was actually well cared for. So you could argue that was a good price. Whoa, that's bright. Excuse me, it's a beautiful day as well. You could argue it's a really good price to keep that truck on the road. But you know what? Nah. I just decided, no, I'm not doing it. Had the guy come back to me and said, look, you need 250 quid worth of work, maybe even 500 quid worth of work, I probably would have just swallowed it. I went, I don't bother. But the fact that this guy had shafted me every which way for Sunday, not a chance. So I was lucky. I got the money back. The money went back in my account. He took his truck away and I got to forget all about it and start the journey again. But the point is, these are the risks that you take when you're buying vehicles on Marketplace. Don't get me wrong, there's some really, really honest, decent sellers out there. Of course there is. It's like everything in life. But there's some right dodgies out there, by the way. And you've got to be careful. Now, this is twice this has happened to me, because last year I bought a vehicle daily that turned out to be an absolute shed as well. And now, this. Now, if you're buying vehicles, especially work vehicles, if you're buying them for a couple of grand, of course they're not going to be showroom, and I'm not expecting them to be showroom, but I do expect them to be legal, especially if it says on the advert, year's MOT, then it should be what it says it is. I fully understand that there will be bits and bobs wrong with these things, of course there will, because they're old, right, and they've probably been battered to death. However, I was lucky, and I was lucky enough that this guy came back and got it, and that was that. But it just shows you, you've got to be really careful. And like I said at the start of the video, I feel like a bit of an idiot. I did a video ages ago about don't buy a new van, buy a used van instead. Everybody was like, yeah. Well, that's 2 in a row now, right? So, but listen, you live and you learn. Will it stop me buying a used van? Of course not. Do you want to know why? Because I refuse to put, a van on finance. I am not spending, 15, 20 grand on a van. And let's be honest, a new van, is there any guarantees that it's going to be any better? Probably not. These new vans are just in and out of the garage just as much as these old ones. So, no, I'm not interested in wet belts. I'm not interested in iPads and all that silly nonsense that comes with all these new things. I just don't want it. I want something that's honest, rugged, and does the job. So I won't be spending money monthly on a van. It's just not going to be happening. I'll continue my quest to find the used truck or the used van that's going to help me carry this business through to the next stage, because business is taking off. It's doing really well, and I'm managing okay with this thing, the Tourneo Connect, but it's not designed for for heavy load towing. It can tow a trailer, it can tow a 2-berth caravan, but after that, forget it. It'll do it, but it's not legal, and the last thing I want to do is snap the timing belt or wreck the automatic gearbox in this. So the clock's ticking. I need to get something that's going to do the job. So yeah, so stick with me. If you've been watching the channel and enjoying the content, amazing, thank you. I really, really appreciate it. The channel's growing massively, and there's so much more coming up. There's actually been a lot happening that I just haven't showed you because I've been so busy, and picking up the camera and stuff has been the last thing in my mind, just because of how much has been going on. But I've got a lot lined up, so stick with me, and I'll see you in the next one.